On a quiet morning in Chicago, an audacious heist unfolded that would shock the city for decades. A small team executed a near-impossible bank robbery, bypassing state-of-the-art security, and vanished into the sky in a helicopter with millions in cash and uncut diamonds. No one knew who they were, how they escaped, or where the money went. Today, decades later, new evidence is emerging that could finally reveal the shocking truth behind one of the most daring crimes in modern history. In the early hours of May 14, 1976, the industrial skyline of downtown Chicago was cloaked in the muted haze of a spring morning, the lingering chill of overnight rain still clinging to asphalt and steel beams. The intersection of Jackson and Wells, usually bustling with delivery trucks and early commuters, lay eerily quiet, interrupted only by the occasional whir of a streetcar and the distant hum of the Kennedy Expressway. At 4:12 a.m., a gray 1974 Dodge Monaco, meticulously waxed and buffed to eliminate traces of fingerprints, eased into a side alley behind the First National Bank's vault wing, a location that would become central to what investigators would later call the most audacious heist in the city's history. The bank, a monolithic limestone structure with reinforced steel security doors and a labyrinthine layout of hallways and offices, housed assets that were nominally insured but functionally untouchable by anyone outside the institution's inner circle. $12 million in cash, negotiable bearer bonds, and a private collection of uncut diamonds stored in a reinforced vault known internally as Cell 7. Security protocols were notoriously tight. 2 armed guards patrolled each floor on a staggered schedule, video surveillance covered all public entrances, and internal alarms were wired directly to the city police precinct and private security central. The architect of the operation, Leonard Leo Martel, a man whose name would later be whispered with both admiration and fear in law enforcement circles, had spent nearly 3 months compiling a blueprint that accounted for every variable, from guard shift changes to armored transport schedules. Leo, age 38, lean with a wiry tension to his movements, was a former Air National Guard logistics officer who had drifted into financial consulting before adopting a more clandestine profession in high-stakes theft. His eyes, a pale gray that reflected both intelligence and a kind of cold detachment, missed nothing, and his careful attention to psychological manipulation of others proved essential in recruiting his team. Among them was Nathaniel Nate Royce, 29, the internal contact within the bank, a mid-level vault clerk struggling under the weight of personal debt, familial estrangement, and a quiet paranoia that would ultimately render him both indispensable and dangerous. Then there was Michael Mick Donnelly, the pilot, 34, ex-helicopter instructor and Vietnam veteran, whose steadiness under pressure made him ideal for the aerial extraction plan for hours after the initial infiltration. Finally, there were 2 shadow operatives, anonymous even to each other, responsible for surveillance, time distractions, and misdirection along the building's perimeter. By 4:26 a.m., the Team W. as in position. Leo's Dodge Monaco had been parked in a recessed alley designed to avoid streetlights and surveillance cameras, its engine off to prevent detection, and the team moved with military precision. Nate, clutching a briefcase containing coded security override manuals and a set of master keys he had painstakingly photographed from memory over weeks of clandestine observation, slipped into the bank through a service door adjacent to the loading dock. His heartbeat thrummed against his rib cage. The fear of discovery was counterbalanced by the adrenaline coursing through his veins, a cocktail that sharpened his senses to an almost hallucinatory clarity. Security logs later revealed a curious anomaly. The door had been logged as closed and secured at 4:15, yet internal motion sensors remained inexplicably silent as Nate moved past the first corridor. The internal guard on the ground floor, Officer Daniel Krieger, 47, later recounted in testimony that he had seen a shadow, maybe, or the reflection of a mop bucket, I'm not sure, moments before being called to a minor alarm in the adjacent administrative wing, a detail that, in hindsight, contributed to the heist's success by drawing attention away from the real operation. Inside the vault corridor, Nate approached the reinforced doors leading to Cell 7. He recalled the precise sequence: keypad code followed by key insertion, then the slight tactile resistance as the combination lock was disengaged. At 4:51, the door swung open with a silent mechanical sigh. Inside, 12 wooden crates, each weighing between 120 and 150 kilograms, lined the reinforced steel racks. Bundles of $100 bills, sealed envelopes containing bearer bonds, and a small collection of raw diamonds in velvet pouches. Nate's hands shook slightly as he began loading the contents into padded duffel bags, each marked with discreet fluorescent tape only visible under the security lights. Meanwhile, Leo, stationed in the alley, monitored the comings and goings of early maintenance staff, noting the rhythm of city noise and ensuring that the extraction would coincide with minimal external interference. At precisely 5:07, the first contingency occurred. A janitor, overlooked in prior planning, entered the ground floor with a trash cart, whistling softly to himself. Nate froze, duffel bag mid-lift. The janitor, oblivious, paused only briefly to glance at the locked vault doors, mumbling a comment about being late and moving on. The team later referred to this near miss as the janitor moment, a variable that had been unaccounted for in their meticulous planning, but which Nate would later describe as a test of nerves that felt almost like fate. By 5:18, all contents had been transferred into the bags. The internal alarm system remained inactive, a testament to the precision of the override sequence and Nate's intimate knowledge of the bank's technological weak points. Leo signaled Mick, who was hovering at 200 feet above the building in a lightly modified Hughes 500 helicopter, its engine idling to minimize acoustic detection. The extraction point was the rooftop helipad, typically reserved for emergency use, with steel rails and a small elevator for transporting office equipment. The team had studied structural blueprints. The helipad could bear up to 1,500 kilograms, more than sufficient for their payload. As Nate and Leo ascended the service stairs to the roof, tension coiled in their chests. Nate's internal monologue raced, "We've done everything. We've timed every second, every guard, every sensor. If we're caught now, it's over. But we're not caught. Not yet." The city below was waking slowly, streetlights blinking off one by one, early morning traffic beginning to stir, oblivious to the high-stakes maneuver unfolding directly above. At 5:37, the team breached the rooftop door. Mick, in the helicopter, gave a low whistle, a signal that all was clear. The first duffel was loaded, followed by the second and third. The total haul, approximately $12 million in liquid assets, untraceable bearer bonds, and diamonds valued at over $3 million in today's estimation. The liftoff was smooth, the rotors barely disturbing the thin mist clinging to the roof. Yet even in these moments of triumph, unease lingered. Nate, scanning the street below, noted the silhouette of a lone street sweeper, a figure apparently frozen mid-stride, as if the city itself had paused to observe the impossible. Leo, aware of the helicopter's signature radar, mentally calculated the escape vector. A 15-minute flight eastward to an abandoned airstrip near Lake Calumet, chosen for its obscurity and proximity to unmonitored industrial corridors. As the helicopter gained altitude, the first reports of irregularities began to ripple through the bank's communication network. A minor alarm in the administrative wing had been logged at 5:40, and Officer Krieger, who had initially dismissed the anomaly, was now radioing for backup. Meanwhile, the internal security cameras, functioning on a delayed loop due to the override, captured nothing of consequence. The bank's director, Thomas Brennan, aged 52, later recounted the morning with a mixture of disbelief and horror. "I remember walking in at 6 a.m., seeing the vault doors open and thinking, this can't be real. Oh. The cameras, the alarms, nothing makes sense." Brennan, a man meticulous in his professional routines, would spend the next months haunted by the idea that betrayal had come not from external forces, but from someone inside his own organization. By 5:55, the helicopter had disappeared over the horizon. The streets of Chicago remained unsuspecting, the sun cresting slowly over Lake Michigan, reflecting off the glass towers that framed the city's financial district. Yet, beneath the ordinary bustle, a vacuum of absence lingered. $12 million had vanished without a trace, the perpetrators unseen, the logistics flawless. Internal memos, later recovered by investigators, suggested the meticulousness of the planning bordered on obsession. Every day accounted for, every employee behavior monitored, every potential surveillance blind spot noted. What was not anticipated, however, was the psychological toll on those involved. Nate Royce, initially exhilarated by his success, found his conscience gnawing at him. The fear of discovery became a persistent companion. The possibility of betrayal from within the team loomed. Leo Martel, ever calculating, masked any sign of doubt, yet private recordings of his planning sessions reveal subtle expressions of tension. A hand brushing nervously over his face, a slight pause before issuing instructions. Even Mick Donnelly, confident in his skill, admitted in later interviews that the liftoff felt like flying through a thunderstorm without seeing the clouds. By mid-morning, the city was abuzz with news of a missing vault. Reports streamed in from local media, describing a bank robbery of unprecedented scale, emphasizing the seemingly impossible nature of the heist. No witnesses, no alarm triggers, no visible breach. The FBI received an anonymous tip at 9:12 a.m., noting only, $12 million gone. You won't find them. The terse message, devoid of context or sender information, would later be interpreted as either a taunt or a strategic move to delay investigative focus. As investigators began piecing together the sequence, the first signs of irregularity emerged. Security logs revealed subtle discrepancies in entry times. Fingerprints on non-critical surfaces were washed clean, yet a faint trace of Nate's presence remained on the inner door frame, so faint it could have been easily dismissed. The psychological profile of the team, reconstructed through interviews and background checks, suggested an unusual combination of methodical planning and high-risk thrill-seeking, a cocktail that would confound investigators for decades. And yet, amidst the precision and control, a single variable remained unresolved: the exact route of escape after the helicopter landed. Witnesses reported a blacked-out van seen near the Lake Calumet airstrip around 6:25 a.m., but no license plate was recorded. A maintenance worker later mentioned hearing a helicopter but thinking it was a medevac, not suspecting anything criminal. These fragments of information would become the initial threads in a tapestry of investigation that would stretch over years, weaving through legal loopholes, anonymous tips, and cryptic internal notes. The morning closed with a city in stunned disbelief. Thomas Brennan, staring at the empty vault, whispered to his assistant, "This isn't just theft. This is a statement. Someone wanted to show us we could be invisible in our own house." And somewhere beyond the city limits, Leo Martel, his team dispersed but coordinated through prearranged signals, surveyed their loot. The money, the bonds, the diamonds, all within reach, yet each weighed with the moral and psychological implications of a crime that defied understanding. In the months that followed, investigators would uncover hints of premeditation that stretched back years. Travel records showing reconnaissance flights over the city, ledger entries hinting at financial desperation within the bank, and encrypted notes between the conspirators. Yet, the central question remained: how could a heist of this magnitude in a city of millions, executed under the nose of some of the most advanced security systems of the era, vanish almost entirely without a trace? And more chillingly, who among the city's ordinary citizens had unwittingly witnessed fragments of this audacious operation without ever realizing it? The heist had concluded in a matter of hours, yet its echoes would reverberate for decades. Evidence would be found, lost, and reinterpreted. Alliances would fray, moral lines would blur. And while law enforcement agencies mobilized to track the perpetrators, the psychological complexity of the operation, the careful orchestration of fear, trust, and betrayal, remained as enigmatic as the missing $12 million themselves. As the sun set over Chicago that evening, the streets returned to their rhythm, oblivious to the extraordinary events that had unfolded above. But in the quiet corners of offices, in the hushed tones of investigators and the restless minds of the conspirators, one truth was already clear: the story was far from over. Somewhere, in the shadows of the city or perhaps beyond its boundaries, the team that had pulled off the impossible was already contemplating their next move, and the city itself had only begun to reckon with the audacity of a crime that challenged the very notion of security, loyalty, and human cunning. The missing $12 million were more than just money; they were the beginning of a narrative that would test every principle of justice and human judgment. And in that beginning, as the helicopter faded from view and the first reporters arrived on the scene, a question lingered in the minds of all who would come after. Who exactly had orchestrated this and why? The morning after the heist, the atmosphere inside the First National Bank's headquarters was suffused with disbelief and tension, a mixture of corporate panic and personal dread that would set the tone for the months to come. Thomas Brennan, the bank director, sat slumped at his mahogany desk, the polished surface reflecting both the harsh fluorescent lighting and the chaos that had erupted overnight. Investigators from the Chicago Police Department, accompanied by an FBI tactical response team, had already begun combing through every inch of the building, from the vault corridor to the loading docks and rooftop access points. Agent Harold Stein, a seasoned profiler with over 20 years in federal investigations, had arrived on scene by 9:45 a.m., his trench coat damp from the persistent drizzle that mirrored the city's somber mood. Stein's first observation, quietly noted in his journal, was that the precision of the heist suggested not just careful planning but a level of logistical sophistication rarely seen outside organized crime syndicates or military operations. Within the first hour, the investigative team began assembling the puzzle pieces. Surveillance footage, delayed due to the override loop, had been preserved on backup tapes, yet they revealed nothing beyond the standard early morning security routines. Motion sensors had been manipulated with such exactitude that investigators initially suspected a technical malfunction rather than intentional sabotage. A security audit later confirmed the override was executed using authentic codes obtained from an internal source. It quickly became clear that Nate Royce, the vault clerk, was not merely a participant but the linchpin of the operation. His background, initially unremarkable, was examined with a forensic lens. A 30-year-old man with a modest salary, mounting personal debt, and strained family relationships. Interviews with colleagues painted a picture of a cautious but meticulous individual, someone who noticed patterns, schedules, and subtle discrepancies in day-to-day operations. Agent Stein noted that Nate's psychological profile, motivated by desperation yet tempered by technical competence, made him both capable and unpredictable. Meanwhile, forensic teams processed the vault and surrounding corridors with painstaking care. Fingerprints on non-essential surfaces were largely absent, but faint impressions on the inner door frame and the steel edge of a duffel bag suggested careful avoidance rather than oversight. Fibers from clothing materials not consistent with staff uniforms hinted at the presence of outside operatives. Dust and smudges indicated movement patterns, a left-to-right sweep across the vault, then retracing steps toward the service stairs. Investigators reconstructed the sequence of events to the minute. 4:12 a.m. Dodge Monaco arrives in alley. 4:26 a.m. Nate enters service door. 4:51 a.m. Vault door opened. 5:07 a.m. Janitor moment. 5:18 a.m. All contents transferred to duffel bags. 5:37 a.m. Rooftop extraction signal. 5:55 a.m. Helicopter liftoff. 6:25 a.m. Potential blacked-out van sighting near Lake Calumet. Every time-stamped entry in the log added layers of precision and simultaneously highlighted the audacity of the heist. Financial investigators began tracing the missing $12 million and the uncut diamonds, following a web of potential laundering channels. Banks were queried for unusual transactions, private brokers examined for sudden asset transfers, and financial institutions across state lines were notified. Yet the trail remained frustratingly cold. No legitimate financial movement could be connected directly to the heist, no off-site accounts reflected deposits, and the diamonds, though theoretically traceable through gemological records, had vanished into private circulation. Analysts later concluded that the perpetrators likely intended to liquidate the assets through a network of offshore intermediaries, further obscuring any direct links. In parallel, law enforcement expanded the search perimeter around Lake Calumet, where eyewitnesses reported seeing a blacked-out van minutes after the helicopter landed. Forensic sweeps turned up partial tire impressions in the dirt, but insufficient to determine make, model, or unique tread patterns. Local industrial workers interviewed reported hearing rotor sounds but dismissed them as routine training exercises, a critical delay that allowed the suspects to disperse undetected. Agent Stein noted in his briefing that the level of coordination suggested prior knowledge not only of the cityscape but also of human perception. The heist exploited predictable attention lapses, the blind spots of casual observers, and the timing of mundane activities like janitorial routines and early morning maintenance. The psychological toll on Nate Royce became evident almost immediately. Interviews conducted weeks later with family and associates revealed that he oscillated between moments of elation and crushing guilt. He was meticulous in recounting the heist, yet his descriptions betrayed subtle anxiety, micro-expressions of fear when recalling the janitor encounter, hesitation when discussing security overrides, and an almost compulsive need to justify each movement as necessary and calculated. Agent Stein's notes highlight this pattern. The subject demonstrates a heightened awareness of risk, coupled with anticipatory guilt. This duality is key, it increases the likelihood of detectable behavioral anomalies under interrogation. Indeed, in an early attempt to negotiate immunity in exchange for information, Nate's inconsistency in recalling exact timings and communications among team members prompted investigators to focus on corroborating evidence rather than personal testimony. Leo Martel, the architect, proved even more elusive. FBI intelligence reports later pieced together his movements through surveillance of known associates, travel logs, and phone records. Between the days preceding the heist and months afterward, Leo conducted a series of reconnaissance flights, made brief appearances in financial districts under assumed identities, and coordinated signals using analog methods to avoid electronic detection. His operational discipline was mirrored in meticulous documentation, cryptic notes, and secure communications. Interviews with acquaintances painted a man charming yet intimidating, capable of inspiring loyalty and fear in equal measure. Analysts later described him as a predatory strategist, someone who could anticipate human behavior with uncanny accuracy and exploit it for personal gain. As investigators delved deeper, they uncovered internal communications within the bank indicating small discrepancies in scheduling and logins. Security cameras temporarily disabled for maintenance, routine vault inspections delayed, and staff rotations misaligned in ways that, though subtle, created exploitable gaps. These details suggested that Nate Royce may not have acted entirely alone in manipulating INT, containing vague but instructive references to access protocols and alarm sequences. Though incomplete, these communications suggested premeditation beyond Nate's documented involvement. Psychological profiling of the team members, when combined with environmental reconstruction, created a portrait of extraordinary precision and audacity. The heist was not random. It exploited institutional blind spots, personal vulnerabilities, and predictable human behavior. Yet the investigators also recognized an element of unpredictability. The heist relied on split-second timing and unobserved variables that could have easily unraveled the plan. The janitor moment, the blacked-out van, and the rooftop ascent exemplified this tension between control and chaos, illustrating why the crime would remain unsolved for decades. Interviews with witnesses months later revealed further anomalies. A security guard stationed on an upper floor recalled seeing a silhouette at the rooftop access point, though he dismissed it as a maintenance worker. A nearby street vendor reported unusual rotor noise early that morning but assumed it was a media helicopter covering a traffic incident. These fragments, seemingly insignificant at the time, became pivotal in reconstructing the heist's chronology and understanding how it manipulated both human perception and technological systems. By late 1976, the case had entered a prolonged phase of analysis. Internal reviews, cross-agency collaboration, and federal oversight created a framework for a complex investigation, but the trail remained frustratingly thin. $12 million in cash, untraceable bonds, and millions in diamonds were gone, leaving behind only meticulous records, partial forensic evidence, and a city questioning how such an audacious crime could occur under the noses of some of the most secure systems of the era. The human component, the blend of fear, greed, and morality, proved as elusive as the physical evidence. As the investigation progressed into the following years, recurring questions remained. Who had orchestrated the heist? Had Nate Royce acted alone in exploiting internal weaknesses? Where had the money, bonds, and diamonds ultimately been moved, and what networks facilitated their disappearance? Subtle clues, a fleeting photograph of a van at the airstrip, coded ledger entries, anonymous tips received by the FBI, hinted at a web of conspiracy yet to be fully uncovered. Analysts frequently noted the psychological interplay, the criminals' meticulous planning, their anticipation of human error, and their willingness to exploit both technical and social vulnerabilities created a scenario where every variable was accounted for, except perhaps the passage of time itself, which would eventually expose their actions through accumulated evidence and shifting loyalties. Even decades later, modern investigators employing advanced digital forensic techniques, financial modeling, and cross-reference databases began to uncover faint traces of the operation. Offshore accounts, previously invisible to 1970s-era auditing, were matched to remnants of the stolen assets. Communications once thought destroyed were partially recovered through archival backups. And yet, the human narrative, the interplay of ambition, fear, and betrayal, remained central to understanding the heist's full complexity. The The story had evolved from a mere theft into a study of human behavior under extreme conditions, highlighting the blend of courage, recklessness, and cunning required to execute and conceal such a high-stakes operation. By the end of the investigation's early phase, the consensus among federal and local authorities was clear. The Chicago helicopter bank heist of May 1976 was not merely a criminal act but a masterclass in psychological manipulation, logistical precision, and audacious risk-taking. The trail of evidence, though partial, began to reveal the outlines of a plan that had exploited both the predictable patterns of human behavior and the structural vulnerabilities of one of the city's most secure financial institutions. And yet, the final locations of the $12 million, the bearer bonds, and the diamonds remained shrouded in mystery, a puzzle that would draw investigators, journalists, and true crime enthusiasts into decades of speculation, analysis, and renewed pursuit. As modern investigators sifted through the remaining clues, archived surveillance tapes, partial witness testimonies, and recovered correspondence, the psychological stakes remained just as high as the material ones. The perpetrators had vanished from immediate detection, but their human fingerprints, the choices, hesitations, and calculated risks, continued to guide the reconstruction of events. And at the heart of this ongoing inquiry was the same unanswerable question that had haunted law enforcement since the first morning after the heist. Who truly orchestrated this audacious operation, and would the full scope of their plan ever be revealed? The investigation, like the city itself, moved forward with cautious intensity, the shadows of May 14, 1976, extending far beyond the initial heist. And while the $12 million remained missing, every recovered fragment of evidence, every subtle discrepancy in schedules and behavior, and every cryptic communication brought investigators closer to a truth that had remained hidden in plain sight for decades. The story, in its evolving complexity, was far from over. The next steps, connecting financial traces, decrypting coded messages, and reconciling human testimonies, would uncover alliances and betrayals previously unimaginable, setting the stage for the ultimate revelation that would test both justice and morality in ways the city had never experienced before. The trial of Nate Royce and his accomplices began years after the audacious helicopter heist, with the courtroom tense as prosecutors presented meticulously gathered evidence. Time-stamped vault logs, partial surveillance footage, and forensic traces linking Nate to the internal override. Witnesses testified to suspicious activities, while financial analysts detailed the missing $12 million and vanished diamonds. Leo Martel, never apprehended, remained a phantom, his strategies revealed only through Nate's reluctant admissions and recovered correspondence. Families of the bank staff confronted the human cost of betrayal and fear, while jurors wrestled with moral ambiguities. Was desperation a mitigating factor or simply another element in an expertly executed crime? By the trial's end, convictions were secured, yet the stolen assets remained largely unrecovered, leaving the city haunted by both the precision of the heist and the shadow of Martel's genius, a reminder that some crimes, no matter how well documented, defy full closure. Years after the heist, new evidence emerged from previously overlooked bank ledgers and archived flight records, reigniting the investigation. Digital forensic analysts uncovered encrypted notes hinting at offshore accounts linked to the stolen $12 million, suggesting that Leo Martel had established an intricate financial network to launder the assets. Nate Royce, serving his sentence, cooperated sporadically, revealing only fragments of the escape plan and cryptic references to unseen collaborators. Meanwhile, investigators traced the blacked-out van sightings to industrial warehouses near Lake Calumet, though no definitive physical evidence remained. The lingering mystery of Martel's whereabouts and the unrecovered wealth fueled media speculation and law enforcement obsession alike, emphasizing that, decades later, the psychological and logistical sophistication of the crime continued to challenge understanding, leaving both victims and authorities trapped in a web of unanswered questions. Decades after the Chicago helicopter heist, the investigation took an unexpected turn when retired investigators and financial auditors revisited cold files in light of newly digitized records. Analysts discovered patterns in obscure bank transactions from the 1970s that had previously gone unnoticed, small, incremental transfers through offshore accounts that hinted at an organized laundering scheme connected to Leo Martel. Nate Royce, now in his 60s and recently released from prison, reluctantly agreed to meet with federal investigators, providing fragmented memories of the operation. He described the precision of the liftoff, the sequence of duffel bag transfers, and cryptic mentions of an unknown third party responsible for coordinating the final dispersal of the cash and diamonds, someone whose identity had eluded authorities for decades. Meanwhile, investigators traced the blacked-out van sightings to a series of abandoned warehouses near Lake Calumet, where partial fingerprints and tire impressions, long overlooked, were finally matched using modern forensic technology. Satellite imagery and city planning records revealed subtle modifications to one warehouse that could accommodate both helicopter landing and vehicular transfer, confirming that the heist had involved more infrastructure than initially assumed. As the evidence accumulated, it became clear that Martel had anticipated not only the immediate escape but also the long-term movement of assets, employing a combination of psychological manipulation and logistical foresight that rendered traditional investigative approaches nearly ineffective. Law enforcement teams conducted interviews with surviving associates, some of whom had remained silent out of fear or loyalty, uncovering hints of financial networks spanning multiple states and countries, suggesting that portions of the stolen $12 million had been integrated into legitimate businesses, yet never fully traced. The psychological dimension of the case became increasingly significant. Investigators noted that each participant, even decades later, carried the weight of guilt, paranoia, and moral compromise. Nate spoke of restless nights, haunted by the consequences of his actions, while financial intermediaries expressed subtle anxiety when questioned, their behavior betraying the hidden connections to the heist. As the pieces of the puzzle slowly converged, a troubling realization emerged. Despite decades of effort, the true scope of Martel's orchestration might never be fully revealed. Every discovery opened new questions about uncooperative collaborators, undiscovered asset caches, and the psychological legacy of audacious criminal genius. The city itself, long accustomed to routine and order, remained shadowed by the memory of a crime that defied comprehension, where $12 million in priceless diamonds had vanished almost entirely without a trace, leaving only meticulously documented fragments, human testimony, and the haunting brilliance of a plan executed with near-perfect precision. Each breakthrough in the investigation only deepened the intrigue. Partial ledgers pointed to other potential accomplices, cryptic notes suggested contingency measures still undiscovered, and modern forensic techniques revealed faint clues hinting that some of the stolen wealth might still exist, untouched and hidden in locations deliberately chosen to evade detection. The psychological stakes remained as high as the financial ones, with investigators grappling not only with evidence but also with understanding the human behaviors, motivations, and manipulations that had made the heist possible. And while decades had passed, the story was far from complete. Every new piece of information suggested that Martel's reach, his foresight, and the sheer audacity of the operation continued to cast a shadow over both law enforcement and the city itself, a testament to the enduring complexity of one of Chicago's most legendary crimes. The final chapter of the Chicago helicopter heist investigation unfolded as law enforcement and prosecutors confronted the tangled web left behind by decades of careful planning. With Nate Royce now an older man, weary and reflective, federal investigators leveraged both his testimony and newly uncovered financial forensics to reconstruct aspects of the operation that had remained hidden for over 40 years. Offshore accounts, shell corporations, and subtle transfers traced portions of the stolen $12 million, revealing that while much of the money had been laundered into legitimate enterprises, certain caches, small stashes of unreported cash and uncut diamonds, remained undiscovered, their locations only vaguely indicated in cryptic notes and partial correspondence. Court proceedings, though limited in scope given the passage of time, highlighted the human toll. The families of bank employees recounted lingering trauma and financial strain, while Nate's own children wrestled with shame and the moral implications of inherited legacy. Testimony from retired agents illustrated the extraordinary level of ingenuity in Martel's orchestration, contrasting with the often slow, methodical pace of law enforcement bureaucracy, and emphasizing the challenge of achieving full accountability decades after the fact. Even as convictions and plea agreements were finalized for some participants, the specter of Martel himself, never apprehended, a master strategist operating from the shadows, remained, his identity and whereabouts unresolved, leaving a void at the center of the narrative. The psychological dimension persisted. Guilt, paranoia, and moral ambiguity continued to shape the lives of those involved, while investigators, journalists, and historians grappled with the ethical dilemmas inherent in pursuing justice long after the initial crime. In reflecting on the heist, Analysts noted that its brilliance lay not only in meticulous planning and audacious execution but in its manipulation of human behavior, timing and institutional blind spots, a lesson in the intersection of opportunity, greed and psychological insight. The story closed with a sense of partial resolution. Key actors held accountable, some wealth recovered, and the procedural triumphs of modern forensic investigation celebrated, yet it retained an enduring mystery, the precise fate of the remaining assets, the final role of undisclosed collaborators, and the elusive genius of Leo Martel. Chicago, as a city, continued to live with the shadow of that May morning, a cautionary tale of audacity and human fallibility, proving that even decades later, the full truth of an extraordinary crime can remain tantalizingly just out of reach, a haunting testament to the complexities of justice, morality, and the enduring consequences of choices made under the pressure of ambition and desperation.